Hello and welcome to this edition of Beyond the Brain, the Texas Neurological Society's podcast, where we talk about science, policy, and things that are shaping the neurological landscape in the state of Texas. And today we are going to talk about a recent legislative win, which appears to be very promising when it comes to dementia research. Today will be our first episode where we dive into DPRIT, which is the Dementia Prevention and Research Institute of Texas. Texas is a large state. We have a lot of citizens here. And when we talk about Alzheimer's and related conditions, over 6.5 million Americans over the age of 65 are affected by Alzheimer's disease. And that number increases when you include other neurodegenerative processes like Parkinson's disease, like Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal dementia. So that includes this whole family of what we call neurodegenerative conditions. And here in the state of Texas, you're talking about 450,000 individuals over the age of 65 that are affected by either Alzheimer's disease, and more than that if you include other neurodegenerative process, like I said, Parkinson's and other things like that. We're also blessed to be in a state with a large number of research institutions, and we're doing a lot of great research. We have a number of great academic programs here in the state. So it's important that we have the resources to be able to do the research that it needs to make some advances when it comes to Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative disorders. When I think about Alzheimer's disease and where we are with treatment, the first medication approved to help slow the progression of Alzheimer's disease was Aricept in 1996. And that was followed by Namenda in 2003. So it's been a number of years since we've made really robust advances when it comes to the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. Until recently, several years ago, we had the approval of the anti-amyloid therapies, which are, of course, IV therapies, with the goal, again, of slowing the progression of the disease. The approval of the anti-amyloid therapies brought a lot of attention to this field and increased the amount of people who were interested in really looking at Alzheimer's disease and really trying to find not just something that slows the progression, but also a cure, and looking at things that help to prevent as well neurodegenerative disorders. So you take all of that attention, and during this last legislative session, you had the passage of DPRIT, which stands for the Dementia Prevention and Research Institute of Texas. It was called Proposition 14. And once it passed through the legislature, it was placed in front of the Texas citizens in a vote on November 4th. And it passed. And it became the largest state-funded dementia research program in the nation. Over 2 million Texas voters approved this by almost 70%. 68.5% of voters approved this. Now here we have a previous program that was voted through, CPRIT, which is the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas, which served as kind of the backbone or the blueprint for creating this program. Cancer, of course, is something that nationwide we're trying to fight, constantly finding a cure. And so legislators listened to the public and decided that dementia as well is something that we need to invest a considerable amount of time, energy, and resources into finding treatments and a cure. And not just treatments, but also looking at things like preventative medicine and preventative things that you can do to help prevent neurodegenerative disorders as well. So let's talk about DPRIT, how it came about, and kind of where it is right now. So DPRIT stands for the Dementia Prevention and Research Institute of Texas. And the purpose of this is to fund and accelerate research opportunities into dementia and related neurological disorders, neurodegenerative disorders as well. And it's not just looking at finding a cure or medications. It's also funding efforts to lead towards innovations in improving care, advancing discoveries, and really strengthening the Texas ecosystem when it comes to dementia and neurodegenerative disorders research. It's designed to support early stage innovative biomedical and neuroscience research, and to help to take these promising ideas that we find throughout the numerous research institutions here in the state of Texas and help to propel those ideas forward into commercialization and clinical impact. So from that sense, since it's not just a funding source for basic science research, but it also touches on translational research and things like innovation and how to take this innovation forward into commercialization. So it creates a platform for both universities, hospitals, and private companies to collaborate for grants for things like technology and advancement towards commercialization. This funding really sets up Texas as a hub for innovation when it comes to neuroscience research and neurosciences, and with the vast amount of efforts that we have already instituted throughout the state towards dementia, towards neurodegenerative disorders, this will certainly add to that and keep the momentum going towards positive research, towards eventually finding better preventative methods, as well as things that slow the progression, and ultimately a cure, which is of course the main goal. The amount of funding that was approved through DPRIT was $3 billion over a 10-year period, so about $300 million a year. And the goal of the project is to accelerate breakthroughs in the prevention, the treatment, and potential cures for dementia, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and neurodegenerative disorders. When you look at $3 billion, that's a substantial amount of money that goes into research. There have been some different issues and things going on a federal level, which have somewhat limited research dollars and the ability to get a lot of research dollars. We're constantly advocating on a national level through the American Academy of Neurology for increased research dollars into things like the Brain Initiative and different things like that. So there is this national front towards increasing research into neurology and neurosciences. But the state of Texas has taken a bold step in approving this $3 billion to be able to use here in the state with our research institutions and collaborating with the hospitals as well as industry towards really moving Alzheimer's and dementia related research forward here in the state of Texas. So what should the public expect from this? Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, dementia affects hundreds of thousands of Texans. It places a heavy burden on caregivers and families who have to care for patients with dementia or related neurodegenerative disorders. So the economic case is made that this is a major social and economic disease that has a huge impact. Like I mentioned earlier, over 450,000 individuals in the state of Texas who've been affected by this. So it makes sense that we would allocate funding towards increased research into things like prevention or other resources that will not only help patients, but would reduce caregiver burden. And what does this mean to neurologists and researchers? Well, hopefully, once we get through some of the legal challenges, which we'll talk about in a minute, this will open up an avenue for increased funding so that researchers can create or apply for grants and funding opportunities to really put some of these ideas into action. Some of these programs and different things that we have been thinking about, either from a preventative standpoint or a treatment standpoint, will now have increased funding outside of federal funding to be able to put those things into action. So the way that DPRIT even came about was a great example of the legislative process working with the citizens of Texas. The legislators got things going by passing it through Texas House and Senate. And then it went to the voters, and the voters unanimously approved, almost 70% of voters approved the fact that Alzheimer's and neurodegenerative disorders is a big thing, and we need to put more research, more funding into this. So because DPRIT could affect the entire research pipeline here in Texas, that means that there will be more grants, more studies, more collaboration among the different entities that are looking into this field. It may also strengthen Texas' role in the national landscape when it comes to neurosciences. Researchers have said the Institute could help the state become a destination for dementia research and care, similar to how CPRIT, which is the Cancer Prevention and Research Initiative of Texas, how CPRIT has positively impacted the cancer ecosystem here in the state and further led to the elevation in cancer research. So for clinicians, this could eventually mean more clinical trials, a stronger academic partnership, and a kind of faster movement towards the discovery of both preventative measures, treatment measures, and hopefully ultimately a cure. So the big question that a lot of people have is what is going on with the DPRIT funding. This went forth for a vote this past November, and it passed unanimously. But to date, none of these funds have been approved or allocated to go towards the research that the legislation and that the voters are really looking for. So what has been going on? The initiation of the Institute has been slowed down by legal challenges. There was a lawsuit filed by 2 or 3 individuals looking at the legitimacy of the voting polls. And the lawsuit claims that the voting machines used in 251 of the state's 254 counties, they weren't properly tested for accuracy. Now, earlier this year, in Travis County, I believe, there was a legal win in saying that this lawsuit may not be valid. But even with that, this has still slowed the implementation of DPRIT and the ability to really start deploying these funds and to really get the research going. So we've talked about how DPRIT got started, how it went through the process of getting approved, and some of the legal challenges that we currently face. But looking forward to after these legal challenges, and once we can finally start to implement these fundings and put them into action. The first thing that has to happen is, again, once the legal challenges. Right now, there's a lawsuit pending, And once that is gone through the process, then we need to figure out the best way to implement these funds. $3 billion is a lot of money, and you want to make sure that the funding that there's a process in place to make sure that this funding goes to good resources that's going to achieve the goals that this bill and this initiative ultimately wants to achieve. Now, the good thing about it is that we have a blueprint here in the state with CPRIT, or the Cancer Prevention and Research Initiative of Texas. So the powers that be have something to look at, or something that they can use to mimic, or a blueprint to use with moving forward with DPRIT. Once it gets out of the courts, but it's going to be a tall task to figure out how we launch this program. How do we create the review panels that will help shape this program and move it forward? But on a larger scale, this sends a very broad signal across the nation that Texas is willing to put forth a substantial investment into neurological disease research, not just cancer, but also dementia and neurodegenerative diseases. If it's executed in the appropriate way, this could change the landscape for academic institutions, clinicians, and the partnership between industry and the institutions toward really building a robust neuroscience ecosystem, which we already have here in Texas, but this would go and take things to the next level and really building this ecosystem out, and eventually helping to find ways to prevent Alzheimer's or neurodegenerative disorders, finding better things to treat it, and hopefully eventually finding something that can reverse this process. So stay tuned for future episodes of Beyond the Brain, where we'll dive deeper into DPRIT, especially as this funding resource gets out of the legal process and moves to that next stage, which is the implementation stage. Overall, this represents a major step forward here in Texas towards that commitment towards brain health. And we'll have to continue to follow to see how much of an impact that this is going to make on neurological research as we move through this legal process, and then move to the next big step, which is going to be, how do we distribute these funds, and how do we determine which institutions, which researchers, and what's the right initiatives to put this funding to work. So thank you for joining for this episode of Beyond the Brain. Again, stay tuned for future episodes on DPRIT and other neurological issues and advocacy efforts that affect neurologists and neurological patients here in the state of Texas. This story of DPRIT is still unfolding, and we'll keep watching and see what happens next for Texas neuroscience and the patients who stand to benefit from this research funding. Please tune in for future episodes of Beyond the Brain. I'm your host, Dr. Eddie Patton, and it's been my pleasure to bring you this episode of Beyond the Brain. Tune in to this podcast to continue to hear about interesting topics such as DPRIT and other things that are affecting neurological care here in the state of Texas. Beyond the Brain is sponsored by the Texas Neurological Society, and thank you for your support, and continue tuning in for future episodes.